Okay, time for Wheels Up, 9 o'clock. Okay, the wheels are up, 9 o'clock. The appointed time, we're having an informational meeting with the various energy ministers from Alberta. We, of course, appreciate their time, and I appreciate my fellow commissioners being here to learn as well. So I don't think we have to gavel us in because this is informational, but if you could each introduce yourselves and kind of what your area of concern and expertise is, we'd appreciate it. And then we'll delve into this, which is going to start with you telling us what you know so we can then have a conversation. We can't just have a freewheeling. So if we could start on this end of the table, if you tell us who you are and what your area of expertise is, I'd appreciate it.
For sure. So my name's Andrew Fisher. I represent the government of Alberta in the U.S. West, based in Seattle, but don't hold that against me. And so I cover 11 states, and I meet with folks and talk to them about what we're doing in Alberta and learn what Americans are doing to connect them with opportunities in Alberta. Thank you.
My name is Aaron Engen. I'm the President CEO of the Independent System Operator in Alberta. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been in front of utilities commissions before, but it's always been as an expert witness and being cross-examined, not a fun experience.
Good morning. My name is Nathan Neudorf. I'm the Minister of Affordability and Utilities in the province of Alberta, elected official, and very excited to be here and just talk to you, continue to build our relationship. Obviously, between our two countries, there's many of those conversations happening across both of our border states and provinces. And we look forward to having a great conversation with you here today. So thank you for having us.
Good morning, David James. I'm the Deputy Minister for Affordability and Utilities. I work for Minister Neudorf as his senior public servant on behalf of Alberta, and pleasure to be here today. Thanks for having us.
My name is Megan McCaffrey. I am Minister Neudorf's Chief of Staff. I work as his senior political advisor. I did. Is it not? Oh, okay. Sure. My name is Megan McCaffrey. I'm Minister Neudorf's Chief of Staff. I support him as his senior political advisor. Check, Commissioner from District 1. Let's have everyone speak into the mic so the public can hear as well. If there's anyone trying to listen.
Is that mic?
Any mic, just a mic.
Oh,
Whoever's speaking.
I think that's pretty common. You're next.
Dr. Annie Bukacek, Public Service Commissioner from District 5. Welcome. Wonderful to have you here.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Jennifer Fielder. I'm the Public Service Commissioner for District 4. My hometown is Thompson Falls, Montana, named after the great explorer, David Thompson.
I'm Commissioner Brad Molnar, District 2, which is all of South Central Montana. Kind of a footnote, we all represent about 200,000 people, 20 House districts. So we appreciate you sharing your time and your knowledge with us.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome, Jeff Wellborn, Commissioner. And my hometown is Dillon, about 2 hours south of here. So.
And I'm Will Rosequist. I'm the Regulatory Division Administrator here at the Public Service Commission.
Okay, with that introduction, it's my understanding that our next item up is overview of Alberta's utilities and energy system, with the minister providing an overview of Alberta's electric system, and then AESO CEO remarks on grid reliability, which we're really big on here, market design, and interties. So, Mr. Minister, if you would.
Thank you very much, President. What we're going to do is go through a quick slide deck. I'm going to ask my Deputy Minister and Aaron Engen from the ISO to make some comments just on the technical side. And then I'll come in at the end to help answer questions that you may have and start that conversation. But I'll have them go through the slide. It just works a little bit easier through the technical side of it.
Thanks, Minister. And it's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the electric system and help you gain an understanding of how our market works. The bookends of Alberta's electricity system, generation and retail, probably not dissimilar to what you have here, are competitive sectors within the system. Generation operates under Alberta's energy-only market and is driven solely through private investment. While our transmission and distribution systems are regulated sectors within the system, with investments receiving regulated rates of return approved by our Alberta Utilities Commission themselves. In terms of Alberta's system itself, we have a market with a total generation capacity of just over 23,000 megawatts. We have 3 interties, one to British Columbia, one to Saskatchewan, and of course, you'll be familiar with the Montana-Alberta tie line that's owned by Berkshire Hathaway here into to Montana. We have a wholesale market with 384 market participants, and you can see there how much electricity sales we had in US dollars, as well as our average wholesale price last year. That has fluctuated over the years depending on how much system capacity we had on. A few years ago, we were a little tighter than that. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Engen now just to speak about it.
Thank you. A couple of points I wanted to raise with respect to Alberta in the context of our participation in North American, US, and Canadian electricity grids. Alberta is part of the WEC, the Western Electric, NERC, first of all, the North American Electric Reliability Council, or corporation. We've been involved with that for many years. And I actually sit on one of the committees, the members Reliability Council, where we give advice to NERC on reliability issues across the continent. In particular, hot topics as of late, and I'm glad, Mr. President, you talked about you said grid reliability, which we are really big on here. We are equally really big on reliability in Alberta. So things that have been very topical across North America and we've been very focused on have been the reliability challenges posed by wind and solar. They create real challenges for operating the grid, reliability, and ensuring we have enough energy to be able to, in particular in those times where it's particularly cold or particularly hot, to make sure we have supply on that front. The second thing that we're very focused on across North America and in Alberta as well is supply adequacy. Do we have enough generation? So reliability and adequate supply. And the third thing that we're all focused on is affordability. And Vice President Fielder and I just had a quick chat a little bit ago about what does that even mean? And that is a challenge for all of us across North America. So remember of that, the role that we play in the Members Representatives Committee, as I say, is giving advice to the NERC on rules and standards. We are also a member of WEC. The WEC monitors and enforces standards across North America. Are we okay?
Just David has this.
Oh, sorry. The mission for the WEC is to make sure that we mitigate risks and ensure that there's reliability across the grid. WEC comes to Alberta every couple of years and does an audit of how us as the independent system operator, how we're performing our job and ensuring that we're compliant with all the rules and regulations that have been imposed across the West, including here in Montana. And then lastly, Alberta is also a member of the IRC. It's a council of 9 different organizations, system operators across the US and Canada. There's 9 of these organizations. In the US, the IRC represents about 2/3 of US consumers. In Canada, there's 2 ISOs, and we represent roughly 50% of the population of the province. And these organizations from California, Texas, MISO, in the east, we all get together regularly to talk about issues on the grid. How do we solve them? How do we ensure that we have affordable, reliable, and sustainable power? It's the same topic. It keeps coming up over and over again: supply adequacy, reliability, and cost. So we coordinate with other ISOs across North America to try and solve those problems. And again, wind and solar lately has been a part of that, and also cold weather reliability of the grid. We also get very focused on things like gas and electricity supply integration. Do we have enough gas in order to be able to ensure that we have our generation operating when it matters the most? So we're very involved on a North American basis. And there's, as you can see, there's the map for our role in the IRC.
Thank you, Richard. And as part of that,
Thank you. I'm going to just jump in here before we go too far. You said something that shocked me. Alberta is concerned about having enough natural gas. You guys are nothing but natural gas out there.
We are. We have something in the order of 300 years worth of, call it reserve life index of natural gas in the province. It's less about having the gas, and it's more about having an electricity system and a gas system that are always talking, and so that gas is available when we need it. It's the same issue in the US. We've had these discussions with ERCOT. We've had the discussions in the East. When it gets really cold and gas isn't moving well because wellheads are freezing off, because supply isn't great, who gets that gas when we need it? Should it be electricity or should it be space heating?
One other thing we'll mention, it'll come up on, I think, on a later slide, is that with the increase of renewables within our generating mix, it's now close to 40%. So that for a while, over the last couple of years, actually created a significant reliability challenge when we didn't have enough natural gas generation built and on grid. And we were at a tipping point where over the course of a number of years, we had, I think, 17 alerts by the ISO that we were within a range of not having sufficient dispatchable generation. But we'll come back to that a little bit more later with a slide that's coming up.
Okay, if I could go back to the previous gentleman, I don't understand exactly what the issue is. You have the natural gas. You have, 300 years worth. I'm assuming you have it pressurized to the right amount. Why then would you have a difficulty getting it to the electrical generation? Certainly in Texas, they faced where wellheads froze because there weren't insulated covers. Well, they put on insulated covers. Can you tell me exactly what the problem is? Because we faced although minuscule, an exact same situation in January of 2024.
I keep forgetting to do that. We had the same event in January of 24 as well. The issue is that when it gets to, at the time, both Montana and Alberta were facing minus 40-degree weather. Fahrenheit, Celsius, it's the same. So it was bitterly, bitterly cold. And what we found was that a number of wells, productivity falls just because it's so cold, challenges with wellheads. And at the same time, we have generation that gets derated when it gets that cold. It's just hard for parts to be able to function, move, turn when it's minus 40. And of course, on the other side, space heating demand just jumps remarkably. Most homes in Alberta, most industries use natural gas for space heating. So you have this competition for supply. Generally speaking, for cost saving, and this is the real rub, not just in Alberta, not just in Montana, but in the East as well. Most generators will not contract for firm transmission and will not contract for firm gas because it's more expensive. So what they prefer to do is, I'll take interruptible gas, I'll just buy it when it's available, and I will take interruptible transmission, so I get to use that when it's available. And it's a cost reduction exercise. But the risk is when it turns bitterly cold, that somebody else has access to that transmission and gas supply before you do. And that's why at the NERC and in particular, so NERC and FERC are getting focused on how do we make sure that these two systems understand the needs of each other, so that when it turns super cold, the minus 40, that when a generator says, I need that gas, how do I get it when somebody else has already contracted for it? There's this priority, who's first in line. And this is where, and again, I'll talk about, Vice President Fielder and I were talking about affordability earlier. For all of the ISOs across North America, we're dealing with, if we really want to be sure we have gas-fired generation, that's what the minister was talking about a moment ago, then the ideal solution is you contract for firm supply for gas and you contract for firm transmission capacity. And that way you've got the gas always, but it's always an affordability issue.
Thank you all for indulging my question, sir. Please continue.
Thanks very much. As an independent jurisdiction, Alberta has established in statutes several public agencies that govern the work that we have inside the province and governance. So they work together to balance the affordability and reliability, and also to maintain a fair and open, efficient, competitive marketplace which we have. The Alberta Electric System is responsible for the safe and reliable operations. Maybe I should turn that on. I apologize. So just to go back, as an independent jurisdiction, Alberta has established in statutes several public agencies that are responsible for managing our system. They work together to balance the affordability and reliability of the system, and also to maintain a fair, open, efficient, and competitive market for generation. The first is the Alberta Electric System Operators, responsible for the safe and reliable operation of the system, as you've been hearing from Mr. Engen. The Alberta Utilities Commission is a quasi-judicial body that regulates the utility sector, both natural gas and electricity markets, to ensure the public interest mandate is met. Market Surveillance Administrator is an independent enforcement agency that helps to ensure our wholesale, retail, and natural gas markets are fair, efficient, and openly competitive, which is required under statute. And for our consumers, we have the Utilities Consumer Advocate, which works to educate, mediate, and advocate on behalf of Albertans and represents them in front of the Commission for any rate hearings or other facilities applications that go before the Commission. In terms of our electricity market itself, Alberta's electricity market is an energy-only market. Generators will only earn revenue for the power that they generate or a service that they operate. They're not paid for capacity, unlike many of the other jurisdictions in the U.S. The generator investment decisions are made by private investors. So they take the risk and they determine what type of investment they want to make and which type of generation asset they want it to do. Until recently, we had an open access transmission policy that guaranteed that if a generator was going to connect, the ISO had to do everything reasonable to give them transmission access for that generation asset. We'll come back to that. It's important to note that the private investors, not the government, determine the capacity mix by the type of technology they invest in themselves. And we're in the process right now of modernizing our electricity market. The restructured energy market modernizes the Alberta market to ensure that we're promoting reliability, affordability, and investability. And we expect that this will allow Alberta to retain our market as reliable, affordable, and investable, and continue to have private generation investment and therefore sufficient generation for the needs of our province. In terms of our supply mix and the evolution of our supply mix, in Alberta, generators can be located anywhere in the province where an investor chooses to build. As I noted, that was our transmission policy. Generation is not centrally planned, but as in the case of government-owned and operated utilities in other jurisdictions, as is the case in many other jurisdictions. As you can see today, the majority of the installed capacity are natural gas generators due to the abundance of supply in the province, as Mr. President, you were mentioning. As of 2024, we transitioned away from coal-fired generation based on policies that had been brought in statutes, both from the federal and the provincial level by previous governments. And we've seen natural gas more than make up for the retired coal capacity in the province. Additionally, you'll see in there wind and generation have significantly grown over the past few years as well. A majority of the wind and solar generation are located in southern Alberta, which means that when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining, most or all of our renewable energy sources are offline at the same time. And that has led to impacts to reliability of our system. It also means that we rely heavily on natural gas as the main sources of generation to replace wind and solar when they are unavailable. While storage has a bright future in the province, it isn't currently available, or it's only currently available in very limited quantities at this time. We also have a significant role for cogeneration within the province, and this makes Alberta different from other jurisdictions. Alberta's cogeneration units are concentrated in the oil sands areas in the top right-hand circle that you see on the map there. These projects generate electricity as a secondary source of revenue and business, and our statutes have allowed for generators to make choices to self-supply and export, which is why these cogenerators, both in the industrial area in the north, but also in forestry, have often built cogeneration assets, supply their own power, and then export the residual to the grid. In terms of consumers themselves, we're relatively unique in that most of the electricity demand is to serve industrial customers, such as the oil and gas or the petrochemical sectors. Our load factor is 81%, and it indicates a less volatile demand with industrial, consumer, or commercial customers requiring power 24/7. Approximately half of the power generation on the system serves just this 1.6% of customers by number of customers. Obviously, there's a lot of other customers in small farms and electricity retailers, or retail consumers. Alberta's transmission system. In Alberta, we have transmission facility owners that have set service areas and receive a regulated rate of return over the cost of operating and maintaining the lines as approved by the Alberta Utilities Commission. AltaLink and ATCO maintain the largest transmission service areas in the province. EPCOR and ENMAX operate in the cities. EPCOR is in Edmonton, ENMAX is in Calgary predominantly. ATCO and AltaLink spread out the rest of the province. To date in Alberta, load consumers pay for or have paid for 100% of the cost of transmission. Fees for those transmission lines are collected as a transmission tariff and applied as a line item on consumer electric utility bills, probably not dissimilar to what happens here in Montana. Due to the supply mix shift over the years, significant transmission build occurred to connect new renewable energy facilities. As a result, transmission costs for consumers have skyrocketed. We had a policy in place that allowed, as I said, if generators build in an area, we had an obligation to get transmission to that particular location. To address these costs, Alberta has since updated its transmission policies to encourage use of our existing infrastructure and to minimize the cost increases to Albertans with no longer an obligation to connect, and we can allow for congestion on the system. And our market design is also looking to accommodate for the impacts of that congestion on the generators themselves. Finally, in terms of enterprise, interties connect Alberta to Montana, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. The lines into Montana and BC are synchronous, and they're treated equally between the two jurisdictions, and the available transfer capacity is spread between the two of those. As with other areas across the US and Canada, Alberta, as I've noted, has experienced significant growth in renewables over the past decade. And with the transmission policies and private generation market that I've described, this is creating significant reliability concerns, which we are now taking action to ameliorate. We are implementing stronger regulations regarding renewables development and transmission policies will better control future generation growth. We've also introduced legislation changes to enable the ISO to procure more ancillary services, including fast frequency response to support the frequency challenges that we're experiencing in those reliability. We've also introduced legislation and regulation changes to restore the interties into Montana and BC, which have both been impacted and their available transfer capacity reduced as a result of the reliability concerns that have precipitated from the renewables within Alberta. And I'll stop there and open it up for questions and discussion and turn it over to the minister.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for having us here. We're here to continue to develop relationship and make sure that information and context is available on both sides of the border as the current geopolitical realities that we all face. It's important for us that Montana and Montana residents know that Alberta wants to do more business with Montana, with the greater United States. Alberta has been islanded in our electricity grid for a long time, and we're now seeking to continue to develop that for reliability and for affordability and for increased trade. So we're really excited to be here. We really want to have a thoughtful and fulsome discussion with you. The one last piece of context I'll provide is that the growth rate in Alberta, both in population and renewables over the past few years, has been unprecedented. We went from less than 1% renewables on our grid 5 years ago to nearly 40% in today. And that has really led to some demand for us to make changes to modernize our system and how we have our rules. The second thing, in terms of population, that you may not know, but it has put another strain on our province. There's been times over the last 2 years where the single fastest growing jurisdiction in the world has been Alberta. We've had 2 years where we've grown by over 4% year over year, which is 200,000 people a year. Our third and fourth largest cities in Alberta are Lethbridge, where I live, and Red Deer, both roughly 100,000 people. So we've been adding 2 new cities, the third and fourth largest in our provinces each year, 2 years running. And that's created a lot of challenges for us. So these are significant times that are moving incredibly rapidly, and we're trying to make the changes so that we have the ability to continue to grow and meet the needs and the future needs of our residents and those that we trade with. So thank you, and happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions from commissioners?
I have several.
Please.
So y'all shuttered coal June of 2024. I read on the website. And one of you said that natural gas more than makes up for the generation lost by coal. But we all know coal is kind of the reliable workhorse for dispatchable, 24/7 energy. Are there actions being taken to restore the use of coal in Alberta?
Unfortunately, no. The previous provincial government made a legislative change to get off coal for as per their party platform, and that cost Alberta residents $2 billion Canadian. Second to that, our federal government has introduced clean electricity regulations, which are being contested and worked through, that makes it commercially impossible for private investment to build that. There are currently attached to that not only significant fines, but criminal legislation that would send those companies or their directors and boards to prison. So it is a very challenging. It is a very challenging situation. We continue to work through that both at the provincial level, but the cost to Alberta residents in particular to go from the now converted natural gas back to coal is seen as unaffordable. And without the ability to build new coal, that's just not something that we can entertain. At least private entities cannot entertain that because we have a private market. Saskatchewan, the province to our east, has a public utility, and they have recently just extended the life of their coal assets for that very reason, that it is a workhorse for generation and highly reliable, highly affordable. That is a privilege afforded them due to their public utility that we don't have currently in Alberta.
It could come back up. I have several more. So as far as those that could be sent to prison, what companies, that renewables or
No,
coal?
Coal. Clean electricity regulations require a certain threshold of capturing carbon emissions, and the current level exceeds known technology. So no company is going to do that without a guarantee that they can attain that threshold.
I can understand the trepidation.
Yes.
So Alberta is by far the largest source of natural gas for Montana, correct? And so how many billion cubic feet is that? Do you know?
I don't know if any of my staff, Andrew, do you know that?
We have 133 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in Alberta. I'm not sure what the number is each year, but I can find that in.
If I could have that information,
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. I have at least one more question. So electricity in Alberta is bought and sold through a wholesale market. So, and we had problems in the United States. Texas still has problems with deregulation of electricity, which is basically what you're talking about. And Montana coal under or electricity prices under deregulation. Montana went from some of the cheapest in the nation to some of the most expensive until in 2007, we got rid of deregulation. So I'm just wondering, it sounds like a deregulated market, like ERCOT in Texas, like the, Montana Power was involved with many years ago, and it didn't go well for Montanans. And I'm wondering, is there a way that what you're doing is different than what caused us so many problems back in the 2000?
Yeah, I'll ask Aaron to talk to a little bit of the differences. I'm not as familiar with that part, but it has served Alberta very well. In general, over the past 30 years that we've had the deregulated market, our average price for generation has been Canadian dollars, $60 to $70 a megawatt, which I believe is $30 to $40 a megawatt in US dollars. So it's been very low. What we began to realize over the past 5 years with the increase of renewables at such a rate is that the bidding for that continued to drive that price down. So we've been averaging over the past 2 years $20 to $30 a megawatt Canadian, which is probably less than $10 a megawatt US. So it's extremely low.
Okay.
The challenge is that with all those unique sites, you heard that there was 384 market participants. I think over 250 unique generation sites within the province. Our transmission costs have skyrocketed. So what we have sought to do under our restructured electricity market is add 2 requirements. Previous to our changes, the single requirement was price. If you had the lowest price, we purchased your electricity first. And it's not we, again, it was a wholesale market, but in priority order, lowest price dictated your order of purchase at the strike price for the market. We are now introducing a second requirement for that bid priority order, and that's reliability. So it is the lowest priced, most reliable electricity that will be first in the priority order, giving dispatchable, in our case, now natural gas, a priority order where they can't compete on price with wind or solar, but they can compete extremely well in terms of reliability. And that reordering of the market is what will continue to serve and provide the competition to keep that generation price relatively low, because it is not our primary concern as a cost driver. Our primary concern of a cost driver is now transmission and distribution lines, which is why we've made some changes there to protect ratepayers, because those rules were previously any developer could build anywhere, and the ISO had a zero congestion policy. That meant the ratepayers paid 100% of those increased transmission costs with no question, no argument, no defense. So obviously you can see how those 2 things together will likely rebalance our cost structure by allowing generation potentially to come up, the average price to come up, but push down on the transmission build in a cost causation scenario where, should it be industrial growth or population growth, yes, the consumer should pay their portion of that grid development. But if it's development purely for profit seeking, then the developer can still build there, but they will pay for that transmission cost rather than it just being 100% passed on to the ratepayer. So we've sought those balances. And again, we think with that relatively equal cost pressure up and down, that ratepayers will be protected and we'll have a more reliable system.
Yeah, that cost of $10 to $12, that's about what Montana has, and we're 4th lowest in the nation. So that's really good. So it sounds like one of the differences between what you are doing with deregulation, what we did is the private companies had very little oversight.
Yes.
And there was a tremendous amount of corruption that went on. So so it sounds like the ISO and the Utility Commission, they're both government owned. The board of ISO is government appointed, and then the regulators are that's government.
Regulators for the AEC are also appointed
Appointed by the
and
government.
their arm's length. Yeah. So our government, one of the reasons we wanted to come to Montana and share some of this is that the legislative and regulatory process in Canada in general with the Westminster system is much slower than the process here in the United States. Legislators, it's my understanding anyways, that legislators in the United States, in most legislatures, can just bring forward bills for changes at any time and seek the collaboration across the aisle, or however they do it to move those bills forward. We don't have that ability in Canada. It's much more structured. In a year in the Alberta legislature, we would potentially, at the maximum, table 30 pieces of legislation and try to seek them through. And when we were visiting California a couple of years ago, they were dealing with it at the end of session, dealing with like 2,000 pieces of legislation that they could move through. We just don't move at that speed. And that is, there are pros and cons to different legislative styles, but that is one of the things that we face as a challenge. Is moving quickly in that arena is much more difficult to do. But yeah, there are pros to that as well. Yeah. Thank you. Aaron, did you want to mention a little bit about the ISO?
Maybe a couple of other features that distinguish us from other deregulated jurisdictions and certainly distinguish us from Montana. First of all, one of the fundamental underlying tenets of the province, and the ministers talked about this, but we call it FEOC. For some reason, the electricity industry loves acronyms. I get tired of it. It's an acronym for fair, efficient, and open competition. And as the generators you talked about corruption, which can happen, and it happens in lots of jurisdictions. In Alberta, we also have a market surveillance administrator that watches transactions going on in the marketplace to ensure that people aren't doing things in the market that are not fair, not open competition. And they go in, they do their investigations. Not that long ago, they found that one of the companies in the province wasn't doing something it was supposed to be very technical, and ended up fining them $36 million for the failure to comply with some of the rules. So we have the surveillance administrator watching what's going on. The Utilities Commission, our equivalent of the Service Commission here, has the same kind of role, ensuring that all the rules are enforced across all of the generators. And then lastly, we feel very strongly that competition will reduce the costs. There are many hours now in Alberta where the cost of electricity is zero. And customers in the province are able to hedge those costs because they can get high as well. Prices are very volatile. But we have lots of retailers in the province where you can go and sign long-term contracts with them and get a fixed price. Then it doesn't matter whether the price is up, down, or indifferent. That's a really important feature of the Alberta marketplace. So in the Engen household and the Molnar household, you could decide, I can go and sign a contract with someone. Right now, if you're to go get contracts for electricity, you're probably going to be paying about 5 cents a kilowatt hour for a 5-year contract. And then it just doesn't matter what the price is. And then that $0 stuff that you see in the province from time to time, lots of people, industry will use that, buy energy for those at those prices, and sometimes exports coming down to Montana as well, or into British Columbia. So that's one of the big differences on why competition. And then lastly, ministers already touched on it as well a bit, but Albertans aren't on the hook for those capital investments. When someone builds a big power facility and spends tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, we just had a large natural gas facility built, a combined cycle plant in Northern Alberta. It's 800 megawatts. It was a $1.5 billion price tag for that. Albertans are not on the hook. The builders and the financiers of that take all the risks. So the average person in the province doesn't have to worry about those potentially unattractive investments.
Those must be much larger utility companies than we have here, if they have that kind of money, or isn't the investors?
Well, interesting. I'm glad you, Commissioner Buczek, I like the way you described that utilities. In fact, and this is one of the interesting things about the Alberta marketplace, it isn't a utility that built it. It's a small group of people, a little company called Kineticor. They all know what they're doing. They built power generation before. They designed a big plant, again, 800 megawatts, and found some investors. And in Alberta, you just make the application to the grid. You don't need to contract with anybody. You don't have to have any permission to put electricity on the grid. You get permission around the design of the plant. Is it safe? Does it comply with the rules to be able to connect to the grid? But beyond that, you can connect, start generating, and make or potentially lose money. It wasn't a utility that did that.
That I've seen that are capable of doing that are the multinational, very large tech corporations like Microsoft. And is that what you're talking about? No?
No, in this case, it's
Albertans?
Well, it's a group. There's a group, I'm going to say a handful of developers. The company called Kineticor, I'm going to say 20, 25 people. It's very small, but they're experts in what they're doing. And they managed to find some equity investors that looked at that group and said, you guys really know what you're doing about power generation. We'll back you guys because you know what you're doing. And they went ahead and did this power project in Northern Alberta, all funded by pension funds. And that's very common here in the US as well. So pension funds contributed some money, some banks contributed some money to it. They got it up and built, and they have, back to President Molnar's comment about understanding the gas-electricity interface, they went off and contracted firm gas firm transmission. So they can run in all conditions at all times, but just a small group of people.
And those same kind of contracts are being talked about in the United States as well for AI and data centers. And so that's going on in this country as well. So just one more quick question. As far as the electricity retailers, one of the problems that we had with deregulation in this country, and they still have the problem in Texas, is that those electricity retailers, they would make all these promises to the consumers and then they would back off and kind of take the money and run. So you have regulations against that, protections for the consumers?
Yes, we do. If you remember the slide where we had the 4 regulators, one of them is the utility consumer advocate. They're also extremely engaged in that market to make sure that consumers are protected. We have, I believe, somewhere around 50 independent competitive retailers within the marketplace. Some of them are more specific to region, and some of them are across the whole province. Some of them have sought specific niches within the marketplace. There are a number that utilize our regulatory structure to do things like a solar club, because many residences would have solar panels on their roof, so they get a very competitive rate during the winter, and then they get a very extremely high rate during the summer where they can quote unquote sell back their excess generation to the grid, where really they're not selling, they're getting a credit against their winter rate. So there are those different competitive prices. David actually wanted to add a couple of comments to this conversation as well, hopefully for your benefit.
Yeah, thanks. So just on this particular one, the Market Surveillance Administrator, which is also noted there, they also have oversight on retail markets. They have flagged in the past and then taken in front of the Utilities Commission situations where retail competitors or retail market participants have not been acting appropriately. There was one situation where the Utilities Commission required a retail competitor, Direct Energy, to change a bunch of its actions and its conduct in the marketplace in order to be able to sort of mitigate some of the damage it caused to retailers. And just to go back to the last point associated with the generators, the other example that Aaron talked about, we have smaller ones as well. So there's a company called Versorium Energy, which is just a small group of people, 5 or 10 people, who are right now, they have looked at the entire electricity and gas system in the province and are identifying specific areas where old gas wells were located. They're going to those sites and they're putting sub 10 megawatt reciprocating turbines on, or reciprocating engines, and they are coming in as peaking units in the system. So they've done 10 or 15 of these already. It's a checklist application with the Utilities Commission. They're within 6 months getting to a site, identifying it, approving it, and then building onto the site itself regularly. So it is both extremes in terms of that. Renewable solar, the variety is expansive in the province.
They're not paying anything for electricity. It goes back to that solar and credits and that kind of thing. That's why they'd be paying zero.
One additional, even though they bid in at zero, because of our structure in terms of what we provided for contracts, most consumers wouldn't be paying zero. And because there are 4 component parts to the price on your bill, there's a generation cost, transmission cost, distribution costs, and then all your rates, or all your fees and taxes. And like I said, generation in general has not been the highest cost on the bill. So while we wanted to make sure we had reliability, and in the summer of 2023, when our peak demand exceeded our dispatchable generation, we did have some extreme price events. August of 2023, even though our average price to before that date was 6 or 7 cents Canadian a kilowatt hour, we reached 35 cents a kilowatt hour in August. So as an elected official at that time, recently named to the portfolio, that was terrifying. And that was the first time where our summer peak neared our winter peak. Typically, it's a cold climate. It was winter where we had the demand, but given electrification and the increased number of air conditioners, we saw a summer peak that almost hit the same. So that price drove a lot of the changes that we had to do. And we had roughly at the time 700,000 of Albertans on the floating rate. So many seniors just were on, it was called the regulated rate option was the name of it. And they thought being regulated that they were protected from price volatility. And while that had been the norm, it was not the case. So many seniors came to my office, many seniors came to my office at that time saying, my average bill is $150. Last month's bill is $750 on a fixed income. I can't afford that. It was a very difficult time. And so we did a number of things, passed some legislation protecting ratepayers in terms of fees that were being added on. There was one jurisdiction where their fee was a multiplier of the price of gas, so their fee went up at the same rate as that price increase. So that was deemed unfair. So we changed legislation there. We changed the name of the regulated rate option to the rate of last resort to get people's attention that their rate was volatile and subject to change and not regulated as a false understanding of that. And we've seen since that time that 700,000 is now down to roughly 200,000 individuals. Some of them are still vulnerable in terms they're just moving to Alberta short term, just taking the option that's there before a credit check or any of those kind of things. But there are others, most of the others are those who choose to play the spot price because they can absorb a high price month or two, whereas the general average over the course of the year would be lower than the set contract price. So that's part of it. And again, the bigger parts of the bill are the transmission, distribution, and fees. And we've done a number of things to pass legislation, regulation to make sure that that is, one, consumers are more aware of what they're purchasing, and two, protect ratepayers from things that were just assumed. Under a coal-based system, nobody had to legislate for reliability. Coal is reliable, and it was just assumed. When you bring in intermittent under the same rules, that sudden on-off nature of renewables became a significant reliability threat.
You know, along those lines, I mean, the frenzy for transmission, you know, here in this country, there was a lot of legislation passed in 2021 and 2022 on a federal level, you know, generally called the Green New Deal. And the frenzy at that time was for renewables. It was for solar and wind. We needed all this transmission. We got to cover the complete country with transmission because the generation is happening out in the country and it has to be transmitted into the city. So frenzy, trillions of dollars put into this. Now in Alberta, and a general trend across the country is to throw, you know, the Green New Deal by the wayside, and now it's all going to be used for AI and data centers.
Right.
It's a concern.
For sure. Well, and we don't, as a government, we don't invest in that way. It is all by private investment. So again, we want to just create parameters for responsible growth and development and not just following trends per se, as you say. Again, one of the reasons that we're down here is to talk to proponents across that metal line to make sure that you as a general group that we're talking to down here understand what we're after. We are after better trade, responsible development, because these things do cost huge amounts of money. And it's not that we're opposed to doing that. We just have to do it responsibly because the ratepayer does bear. It's either the ratepayer or the taxpayer, and ironically, often they're the same person, right? So we just want to make sure that we're doing that well. We do have an open desire to see some data centers come in Alberta. Again, do you mind going to the slide that shows our general mix or the amount of generation that we have? So that one, this one will do. Again, our average daily load is 10,500 megawatts. Peak load is 12,500 megawatts. We have capacity of roughly 23,000 megawatts. But to put that into context, we have 21,000 megawatts of data center requests to attach to our grid. Obviously, we can't do that. So my ministry is bringing forward legislation this fall to describe the appropriate responsible path if you want to be a data center in Alberta of significant size and connect to our grid. We have rules now about bringing your own power to do that in a responsible way. Otherwise, you can see how our ship, quote unquote, could be flooded or sunk very quickly because the data center growth rate is so incredibly fast. So we will see likely, through our regulation legislation, we're slowing that down significantly. Not that we would ever expect to get the full 21 gigs, but even 3,000 to 5,000 megawatts, 30 to 50% of our grid on an average load increase in 2 to 5 years would be an Herculean feat. So we're slowing that down, but we do think we're doing so responsibly for all the reasons that you mentioned.
And I think Montana and Alberta will be able to learn from a lot of other people's mistakes. And so I really think we can do it right. And it sounds like you have a lot going for you up there. So it'll be great. It'll be great to work with you and try to learn from each other how to best do this responsibly and protect the consumers.
Absolutely.
So we are all of the same mind in that regard. So
and we are, and that's why we think it's so important. We are talking to all three of our nearest trading partners, because this is a global phenomenon, and any one of us that gets out of step with another, we all compensate for each other anyway. So we don't want any of that unbalanced nature because there will be secondary repercussions to that. So that is why we're down here. We want to increase the trade with Montana. We think there's mutual benefit to be achieved. We're having conversations with British Columbia, conversations with Saskatchewan, and our federal government. To be honest, we are at a time, like I said, the geopolitical stage being what it is. We are trying to strengthen our east-west trade within Canada when some of those north-south trade links are under significant scrutiny. And that does have an impact on our economy. We know that the United States is our single largest trading partner. We want to have a very strong relationship. But when there are moves made by the U.S. federal government, given their relative size to Canada, it has huge impact. So we have to continue to respond and try to figure out how do we balance that, because those trading trends are massive for Canada and Alberta.
Vice President Fielder.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Will the slides be left for us so we can review this? And we're recording the meeting so we can go back and review this. Thank you for the information. It's excellent. And I don't want to ask too many questions because I know we're already behind on the agenda. So just a couple. What does that trade look like that you're talking about? Increased trade. What for what? What's ideal?
Well, again, like I said earlier, Alberta's electricity grid has been islanded. We were the end of line. We have sufficient generation, as this chart will demonstrate, to take care of our own needs. But there are times, whether it's a weather event, typically either the heat of summer or the cold of winter, and we only have 3 quote unquote lifelines or interties with our corresponding jurisdictions, making sure that those are at maximum capacity and full functionality for the market is beneficial on all sides, because we know power will flow where it's in demand the most. That the event where we had a significant concern was, there was another event. It was in the winter, and it was a very large winter storm that covered the jurisdictions of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, Washington. All of us were under that storm. So the electricity demand in all regions was extremely high. And Alberta issued an emergency alert to ask people to voluntarily take their unnecessary load off grid. First time in Alberta's history that I was a minister at the time that we issued that alert for electricity, an emergency alert. Everybody's cell phones went off, and within 5 minutes, 500 megawatts came offline, which averted a potential disaster, to put it bluntly. And the consequence of looking out my front window and many people's front windows, your entire community went dark in an instant, voluntarily. and very possibly saved lives because it was extremely cold and we just couldn't draw power. So making sure that our interties are fully functioning, that we are all compliant to the same rules, that we have agreements that protect generators within each jurisdiction, particularly where there are jurisdictions that have a public utility, so one owner, versus Alberta that has 384 unique owners, or I should say 250 unique owners. We just need to clarify those rules, but that trade of electricity back and forth, we can't predict the weather years out, but making sure that our systems are there should Montana have a need and electricity can flow south. If Alberta has a need, electricity can flow north. That's what I'm talking about. The trade relationship is that we have clear understandings, mutual benefit, fair and transparent access to a competitive market so that we can continue to all grow. Because as our economy grows, there's a potential natural benefit to Montana. As Montana's connectivity and market grows, when we have years of surplus in Alberta, we would obviously love to connect with Montana. So that's why it's a two-way street. And we think that trade could be mutually beneficial if we set the rules correctly.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. When during the presentation, it was said that these private developers can develop the generation and then they can connect. Do you run into problems of over generation and then they're actually in the negative as far as the cost for them?
Yes. Again, that's a fairly recent phenomenon. When generation was predominantly coal and load was very stable, that matching was a very, very small fluctuating trend. When the previous administration in Alberta took us off coal, and you can see on this chart, they wanted to reduce our generation capacity by 5,000 megawatts, so half our average daily generation capacity in a very, very short period of time. That was a very real threat that they didn't fully analyze. And where the only thing that could be built in that speed was renewables. So we made a huge change from reliable generation to non-reliable generation, or intermittent, I should say, generation. Now we got the benefits of some lower cost, but we also received the problems of the intermittency. So we're trying to rebalance that and make sure that we have the dispatchability. Even though they started at the same time, the completion of the natural gas generators didn't happen until years later. So we are now at a place where we have more dispatchable generation than our highest peak daily load, which we're very grateful for. So we are currently in a place of oversupply. 2024 is the first year in about 15 that we've been a net exporter of electricity. Again, pros and cons to that. Montana in general, over the history, has been a net exporter of electricity to Alberta, particularly when we didn't have enough to meet those demands in low wind or low solar scenarios. Now that we have the dispatchable generation, that is the other way. But it can change in terms of economic development, industrial development. It could change very quickly pending data center development in either of our regions. So yeah, we are currently in that place of surplus, and that would be what we would say is the number one reason why the trade has differed in the past year or two with Montana over that line, is that we just have a fortunate reality, very recent, that we have that surplus. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Vice President Fielder, the other point I'd just make on that is, as a private investor, and I think to your point, if I come in and I build a solar farm, or I come in and I build a wind, or I build a gas turbine, and if the market isn't providing sufficient revenue, that's a risk that I end up taking. And so there is a possibility that they could be underwater. And I would say right now, we've got a couple of gas facilities that have built in the last few years, and because of a variety of the circumstances around their their build decisions versus actual ability to get in, supply chain challenges through COVID. Some of those gas generators are right now, I would say, not making the returns that they'd expected to make in the market itself. And that's a risk that they have borne. And unfortunately, some of them are realizing that risk, and they're looking to our restructured energy market for some certainty on it, so that over the 20-year aspect of the life of that asset, they can do the recovery of that costs. And some of the changes we're making in our market will actually allow us to do that, I think.
So it looks like your firm energy is gas, and hydro's pretty firm as well, right? So those are your two primary sources
Mhm.
now. Is there any exploration or contemplation of adding nuclear or expanding hydro?
We have very limited capacity to expand hydro. We just don't have the geography and geology to do so. And you can see, while it's nearing 1,000 megawatts, it most likely will never really exceed that. But we just don't have the opportunity to do that like British Columbia does. Nuclear, we have just launched an engagement with our First Nations. We have a duty to consult with them, and we are talking to Albertans as the general population about what their thoughts are. This was done approximately 15 years ago in Alberta, and it was split, but slightly negative towards nuclear, given the history of the time and different nuclear events around the world that were not positive. We think that attitude has changed a lot. Ontario, the province to the east, has 18 nuclear reactors, and they're refurbishing and they are actually building the first SMRs in Canada to make sure that they can continue to grow that way. We are, given the nature that we have a private market, it will be a significant financial challenge for nuclear to be developed, but we are seeking to find a path that potentially would lead towards a legislative framework that it could happen in Alberta. And given that Saskatchewan has a huge amount of uranium that they process for global nuclear reactors, strengthening our supply chain, strengthening our critical mining within the provinces, and strengthening our interprovincial trade, we think there is a potential path forward to do that.
Mr. President, do we have time, or are we running out of time?
Alana just alerted me that they have a tight schedule. This has been the longest 15 minutes in the history of timekeeping. So what I would like to do is we'll finish up this one topic. Let's recognize that there's several others and there's a great amount of interest. So we'll finish this one up, and with your indulgence, we'll let you go on to your next meeting.
Thank you.
So we might go on another 5-10 minutes. And I would like to enter into discussions as we have cross ties where I'm a member of OMS, so I oversee MISO, public disclosure. I've applied for a similar seat on Southern Power Pool. They have two open. One is reliability, and the other one is resource adequacy. So on the transmission one, can you believe it? Commissioner Pinocci volunteered. And if we are accepted, we'll have those seats. We are obviously part of NARUC, and there's a lot of cross collaboration there. Perhaps we should set up something official, and one commissioner, whoever would want it, maybe once a month, every other month, whatever you feel comfortable with, we trade notes, because from my observation, your concerns are identical to what we have here. So collaboration on solutions as opposed to problems might be of benefit.
Thank you, President. Yes, we would agree.
Any further? Okay, I'm going to keep mine fairly short. I'll first make a statement that the auction at MISO is, I believe, every 15 minutes, and that's her answer to reliability. You know, you can open the window and see if it's dark. You can't count on solar. Stick your finger out the window and you'll know if the wind's blowing or not. Turns out it's not working. That's why I'm involved in Tranche 2.1. At the completion of that, it will be $100 billion transmission build-out. At current trajectory, MDU will receive not one spark, not one transmission line, no distribution lines, not even an extension cord, and to put $2 billion into the rates of some of the poorest people in Montana just seems and all they get is a carbon tax. It seems to me to be a bit unfair. So that if we lose this fight, because they've already done one, it's 2.1, 2.2, 3, and 4. That's where you get to your $100 billion. If we lose this fight, it's gone. If we lose this fight at the first level, which is FERC, we're dedicated to going to federal court and to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's that important. So your issues are our issues. And anything I can offer to the what's called the concerned commissioners, 5 states that are doing this, in the way of a solution rather than identifying problems, I would truly, truly, truly appreciate. So my question is, in your map of Alberta and Montana, at the intertie, where you come into Montana, there's also the intertie where we go into Canada. The regulation reserve required for the variances, and the more wind, the more the variances. The more solar, the more the variances. The larger populations, the more the variances. Are you responsible for the regulating reserve to send us electricity that has the variances out? And are we responsible for regulating reserve to take out our variances, or do we just simply trade variances?
We don't need, neither jurisdictions are responsible for variances on either side of the border. We have this privately owned, non-regulated transmission line, a small one. And the only relationship between the two jurisdictions is folks that move energy back and forth between the two. So there's no obligations in Montana to do anything in Alberta, no obligations for Alberta to do anything in Montana. That said, there is the natural physics of any transmission line that goes between jurisdictions, and that is that we do mutually benefit from the ability for electricity to move back and forth and provide frequency support and other attributes that help give us a more reliable and stable grid. But beyond that, nothing other than now, and there's the minister's given a direction to our organization to go back, let's reevaluate the interties. What can we do to get the full capacity on the interties? And what agreements can we put in place between Alberta and Montana that we can mutually benefit from the development of that transmission line? Whether it's 300 megawatts now, 600 megawatts the next few years, or 1,000 megawatts in 5 years or 10 years. But how can we take that transmission line and turn it into something that's more mutually beneficial between the two jurisdictions? And the minister just sent that out yesterday.
Okay, further questions, Commissioner Wellborn?
Couple maybe.
Please. Just a second, begging your indulgence for time. Is this okay if we go 10, 15 minutes past the 10 o'clock hour?
It is, yes.
Thank you.
I'll take my time, but do it in a hurry. No, just a couple of basic questions. So I think you've done a nice job of drilling down on the number of energy producers and kind of how your grid works as far as transmission. But how about distribution? I mean, how is that handled in Canada? Is it like electric co-ops, or is there many different utility companies that get it out to the people, or how does that all tie in?
Yeah, we'll show you a little bit. We have 4 general regional distributors. You may have heard of them. ATCO is in our north, Fortis is in our south, NMAX is generally the city of Calgary, and EPCOR is generally the city of Edmonton. And then we also have scattered across the province some rural electrical associations that do it for their rural customers. It's a little bit challenging to regulate, as it's a historical growth. Those rural electrification associations developed when farms and farmers had no electricity. So the government wasn't going to spend that much money on that few people. So they did it on their own, which is wonderful, shows the ingenuity and innovation of individuals when they need something. And this is what it's grown to be. So we have this kind of unwieldy distribution layout. I don't know, David, you want to add a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so there's some challenges between the rural electrification associations and the distribution companies, but by and large, the 4 distribution companies that we have, the 4 major ones, there's a few smaller towns and some of the cities the minister mentioned, Medicine, Red Deer, that have their own municipal utility, EPCOR and Max in the cities, and then ADCO and Fortis in the rural areas, all regulated by the Utilities Commission. Municipal utilities are regulated by the municipal councils, including, like I say, Red Deer and Medicine Hat. There's a couple other smaller towns, but the rest are done by the Utilities Commission themselves. We have a performance-based regulation in place associated with that. So they have a set amount of money that they can get every year in terms of their allocations, and then they have to operate within that budget. And there's some true-ups that happen with that depending on their circumstances on capital investments. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
It does. I kind of ties it all together. And then just out of curiosity, what is causing the population explosion in Alberta?
This is where it does get a little bit political in my perspective. Part of it is that Alberta is, in general, the economic driver of the nation. And while over the last number of years, we've seen many provinces and territories struggle with recession or thereabouts, even Ontario, which is a very large population province with a large amount of trade to the U.S., given, again, the current geopolitical situation being what it is, the auto sector and steel manufacturing sector, which is one of their main industries, obviously is under significant strain. Alberta's economy was much more able to weather the storm, and as such, we are the lowest tax jurisdiction in Canada. We have the highest rate of economic job growth. The most recent one that came out for the nation, for Canada, is 60,000 new jobs, 40,000 of those within the province of Alberta, with 12% of the population. We have the lowest housing prices across the nation, and we have some of the most generous social programs because of our relative wealth. Last year, I believe Alberta was one of the only provinces to post a surplus. This year, unfortunately, we are in a deficit just given strain on our system. But all of those reasons combined, both internationally, nationally, and jurisdictionally, Alberta has seen tremendous growth. So the perfect storm. And we, to our own chagrin, about 4 years ago, we began an Alberta's Calling campaign across Canada to get people to move to Alberta to fill unfilled jobs. That was a little bit more successful than we had anticipated. And sometimes we are a victim of our own success. So that all of those factors did create, as you say, a perfect storm. You bet.
With that in mind, I'm going to place us into adjournment, and I truly appreciate this opportunity that you've given us. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.